If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Proper and intentional planning is where most of your success as a home buyer is made. And by success, I mean getting the home of your dreams and at the best price too. This is what separates first-time home buyers that barely scrape by and struggle financially just to afford any home on the market versus those that get the home of their dreams and with a little extra cash in their pockets every month to still live their best lives. So if this sounds like the life that you want to live, then stick around as I break down the planning stage of the home buying process. Coming right up. Aloha and welcome back to the Ultimate Home Buyer's Guide Part 2 by yours truly. I'm Vince, Hawaii Realtor, here to put the real in real estate. If you're watching this, there is a good chance you came from Part 1, but if not, I do recommend you watch that first because this is a follow-up to that video. In Part 1, we did highlight how to determine whether or not you can qualify to buy a home, or in other words, if you qualify for a home loan. After determining that for yourself, now you can move on to the planning stage. The planning stage, which consists of all the time between when you determine if you can qualify for a home loan, all the way up to when you decide to speak to a realtor or a lender, consists of establishing your home goals, as well as what does proper budget making look like. The planning stage is as simple as it sounds, but harder in its execution. This is where you do all of your research to understand what kind of inventory is available to you, understanding how your real estate market is locally and on the national level, because there is a difference, and then what your options are. Does this sound complicated and boring? Yeah, it is. So what is the number one way to make the planning stage super easy and not a complete waste of your time? Partnering up with a good realtor. However, finding a realtor that's willing to help you in the planning stage is very rare. Most of them are trained to help you when you're absolutely ready to buy a home. So for those of you that can't find a realtor like this with a heart of a teacher, I've created this guide with the top tips so that way you can handle the planning stage on your own. So for my first tip, which I've already mentioned, is to research your local inventory. And by inventory, I do mean all of the homes available to you in your local area. And the best way to do this is using the best resource in the world, the internet. Yes, I know, super innovative and groundbreaking stuff here, right? So you do have a few options. There are free websites like Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, but there are some disadvantages to that, which I will go over in a second. But I do want to take this a bit further and say that you could also use websites for big brokerages like Century 21, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker. You see, these brokerages' websites do have a search engine that is directly tied to the MLS. The MLS is the database that all realtors and these big brokerages have access to when you have your license, when you pay your dues. This means that these websites are updated in real time because it's attached to these databases. The only downside to using these websites, however, is that these big brokerages do require you to input your personal data like your email, your phone number when using their search engine, so that way they can go ahead and contact you and help you. Those free websites like Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, you may find that a lot of inventory on there is not up to date, it's not accurate. You may even find homes that were sold back in 2011. And to take this an even further step, if you have a realtor in mind, there's a good chance that they have their own website that's tied to the MLS database as well. For example, I myself have a website and I have a search engine which you can use right here. Apart from those websites, you could also use social media. There are realtors that have social media pages that are dedicated to home tours and showcasing inventory. Not all realtors do that, me included, because I don't want to spam my current followers who are already sick of seeing my real estate content already. So taking all of these different resources available to you, I would say you do research for about a few months. This will give you more clarity as to what most homes in every area around you look like and giving you a better gist of what's available to you. And one other extra step that you could possibly take is to go to open houses in person and check out these houses. There are just certain things that you don't see in photos that you must see in person when checking these houses out. Now, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so it may be hard to do this step, but nonetheless, it is still an option for you. I will say that technology is much better these days, and we have nice photography and actual virtual tours available to you in these listings online. So it's pretty much good enough. So after that first tip of doing your research and looking at your local inventory, the next tip I have for you would be to determine what your dream home looks like. Some things that you want to take into account when you're determining what your dream home looks like are what kind of neighborhoods you like the most in your area, what condition do you want your home to be in when you move in, versus what you typically see in the market, and then as well as your overall preferences. Do you mind sharing walls or common areas with other people, or do you prefer more space and a big yard? In that case, you would prefer a detached single-family unit versus a townhome or a condo. Keep in mind that we are on an island, meaning that land is very valuable, and the more land that you have, the more price that you have to pay. You can literally save $100,000 or more just by living in a townhome or a condo that has less space, that has less square footage. Another thing that you want to take into account is, do you want a brand new home, or do you want a little bit of DIY HGTV action? Obviously, you do pay more for a brand new home, and if you decide to get a new build, it may not have the amenities that you want, or it may not have the same quality as some of the older homes. If you decide to buy an older home and you do a little DIY and improving over a certain amount of time, that has a greater amount of potential for the value to increase. These are just a few things that you want to consider when you're thinking about your dream home besides the cosmetics. If you have access to a professional like myself, like a realtor, I would go ahead and ask these questions so that way they can help you determine what's best for you. So once you've narrowed down your options and your preferences, now you can go into what does the price range look like for this home. Having a clear image of what the price is and what the house looks like will help you in the home buying process. You see, far too often first-time home buyers are easily swayed and they fall victim to desperation in the moment of buying a home, and then they end up having regrets later on because they didn't have that clear image. This is why the planning stage is so important. There will always be homes sold, there will always be homes for you. You want to make sure you're buying for the right reason, and you want to make sure it's you making the final choice and no one else. Okay, so at this point, you should understand now what your dream home looks like, and then what is the lowest and maximum amount you're willing to pay monthly for this home. So the next step in the planning stage is to create a home buying budget.
But wait, Vince, why is this important? Don't lenders already pre-approve you anyway?
Yes, this is correct. However, your lender is not your financial planner. Their job is to tell you how much you can afford at the maximum amount, not to create a budget for you based off of your personal life and your needs. How would they know that along with buying a home, you also want a life outside of it? I have a good friend of mine. He is my go-to lender. His name is Joey Chun. He does a solid job at taking this into account. He will never pre-approve you for an amount that's way too close to your maximum qualifications. He doesn't want to leave you house poor. House poor meaning that all of your money is tied down in your mortgage, making it impossible for you to save or enjoy your life. That is no way to build long-term wealth, right? But of course, the more that a lender approves you for, the more money that's in their pockets. So it is the business that they're in. They're just trying to make a living. That's why it's super important that you have your own back and that you create your own budget, so that way you can go to your realtor and tell them that you're not willing to shop over this amount, even if you could afford to. Makes sense, right? Okay, so moving forward, let's go over some real numbers, some budget making budget making tips. The two things that we are planning for or budgeting for would be, one, the upfront cost, and two, what are you able to and willing to pay monthly for a mortgage. For the upfront cost, I will reference my previous video, what it costs to buy a home in 2021, that will go over all the costs like the down payment, the closing costs, additional fees, all of that. As for determining what you're going to end up paying monthly, there are two ways you can go about this. First, I do recommend that you download a mortgage calculator. I do use this one here. And no, I'm not sponsored by Carl's. Okay, so quickly let me do a demonstration as to how you would use this mortgage calculator. Okay, so I'm gonna open up Carl's mortgage calculator here. The first thing we're gonna wanna input would be the purchase price of your desired home. So right here where it says property value, we're gonna wanna input $450,000, since that's the average price for a condo here in Hawaii. And there we'll input it in the property value. Next, you're gonna wanna input 5% for the down payment, since that's a typical standard for most people, besides the 3% for the first-time home buyers. And then you'll see right next to it, it'll fill in how much the down payment would be depending on the property value. So 5% of the 450 ends up being $22,500. Below the down payment, you see the principal, which is the amount left on the loan after you minus the down payment, after you minus the interest that you pay back to the lender or the bank. Below that, we see the interest rate. Right now, the average is 3%, which is a historic low, as they say. And then below that, you would put 30 years, which is the average length to pay off your mortgage. And then right below that, you'll see that right now, your monthly payment looks like $1,800, about $1,800. But if you scroll down, there's additional information you're going to want to input if it's provided in your listing. The first thing would be the monthly HOA fees and possibly the utilities and bills and whatnot. If you're not familiar with HOA is the Homeowners Association fees. That's the additional fees that you pay to upkeep your community and have access to rec centers and overall upkeep. If it's provided, you're going to want to input the annual taxes that you would pay. Then for the annual insurance, you'll find that later in escrow when you decide on your options as to which insurance company you want to choose. But as for right now, if that's not provided for you, you can roughly estimate that your annual taxes and your annual insurance are roughly about $1,000 a year. And so for this example, for the monthly HOA fee, I'm just gonna put $200 because that's a safe number as to how much you pay for a good HOA. Okay, and then we scroll back up and we go here where it says total. Take into account the additional fees below. You can expect your total monthly payment to be around $2,100 to $2,200. Okay, so that is one way you would determine your monthly payment, by calculating it specific to a home price or the price of your desired home. However, ideally, the best practice is to calculate it based off of your income, not the price of the home instead, and then you would adjust your expectations based off of this. This is a more realistic approach, and you're less likely to stretch your pockets and tear a hole right through it. So to do this, we take your net income, which is your gross income minus its taxes, and you would divide this by 25%. 25% of your income is the recommended amount that you should pay for a mortgage typically. That way you are still left with money to save and to pay for other expenses besides your mortgage. So for example, if you and a spouse made $6,000 combined a month, then your budget would be $1,500 for a mortgage every month. But realistically, you guys know this, 25% of the average take-home pay for a first-time home buyer or millennial, it doesn't buy you a lot of home, especially in desirable housing markets like here in Hawaii, California, Washington, New York. So I believe in these types of markets, a more realistic range would be 30 to 45% of your income. So that original budget of $1,500 now turns into $2,700. Which in Hawaii is closer to the average that you would pay for a mortgage for your first home. Now that 30 to 45% range is kind of large, and it all depends on your needs. Understanding your numbers and your finances will help you determine how badly do you want this house and what are you willing to do to secure that home. Some things you want to consider are you worried about being house poor? Or is having a home your number one priority? If so, maybe having almost half of your household income going into the home won't be such a bad thing since you plan to be in that home a lot. On the flip side, maybe you're someone that just wants a home to sleep in and to put your money in your own pockets rather than putting it into someone else's. Then maybe you'd be in the lower end of that 30 to 45% range. And lastly, maybe you and your spouse may need to consider that in order to afford more home without going over that 45% mark, you may need to find ways to increase your pay. And so that's what majority of the planning stage would look like. After getting the total of your upfront cost and understanding what you may pay monthly, you can now take active steps into saving or possibly increasing your pay for the next 2 to 4 years before you buy a home. Now, I won't go into specifics right now about how you can save because it's different for everyone, but what I can do is leave you with a few tips that apply to most people. First tip would be to work backwards. Now that we understand the total amount that you're needing to save, you can break it down even further depending on how much time you set up until you buy your home. For example, if you plan to buy a home in 2 years, you can divide that total amount you're needing to save by 24 months. Now that you know what you need to save every month up until that point, if it doesn't seem realistic to save that every single month, then you may have to increase the amount of time it takes for you to buy your home. The second tip I can leave you with is to track your expenses every month or even better every week. This will allow you to understand your spending habits and where you can possibly start cutting out things that are deemed unnecessary. Now, I'm not saying you can't buy Starbucks or those favorite pair of shoes you like every now and then, but temporarily you're going to want to cut out costs that don't make a lot of sense at this time. Essentially, we're talking about living a little bit more minimal for the next couple of years until you buy your home. And then lastly, if you have access to this, I do recommend that you do see a financial planner. They are licensed and trained to help you with these things, to create a plan that will get you from point A to B. And so with that concludes part 2 of the home buying guide. I promise you that if you attack this planning stage with pure intention, you'll be well on your way to owning the home of your dreams. It all starts with a step in the right direction and to make the least amount of steps on your path to success. And that is why I'm here. So if you like this video or if you found this helpful, please let me know in the comments down below. Or if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help as well. Thank you for joining me today for part 2, the planning stage. In part 3, we'll go over how to find the right realtor for you, as well as how to determine what lender you should use. Thanks again. I hope you guys have a good weekend, and peace.